Okay. The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Transportation and Protective Security will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to examine the current challenges to air cargo security and assess the Homeland Security policies and industry perspectives in order to better protect air cargo. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Terrorists are relentless in their efforts to target aviation. No matter how much we improve our security posture, they are always willing to adjust and pursue new ways to hurt us. And as the recent laptop threat illustrates, terrorist capability and persistence to target aviation is still very real today. Despite the creation of TSA and DHS and the major improvements to passenger screening and security after 9/11, our enemies have continued to find new avenues for attack. However, we as a nation have always faced these challenges head-on and dedicated ourselves to harnessing innovation and collaboration in order to mitigate the threat. Our efforts to enhance cargo security demonstrate this dedication and resilience. In October 2010, 2 explosive devices concealed in cargo passages were discovered on separate flights originating in Yemen and bound for the United States. These explosives, disguised as printer cartridges, were only found after being transported on both passenger and cargo flights, thanks to a tip from Saudi Arabian intelligence. We know all too well what the threat to passenger aircraft can do and has done to affect air travel and our global economy. The 9/11 attacks led to major overhauls of our transportation and aviation security sectors. Initially, the attacks were made people less inclined to travel and feel less confident in the government's ability to stay ahead of the numerous threats facing this country. The potential impact is nearly identical for cargo security. Terrorists do not discriminate between a passenger plane and a cargo plane. They just want the image of a Western plane being brought out of the skies. And their desired impact is still the same, that it will change our way of life, instill fear in the American people, and leave us questioning our existing security infrastructure. While bringing down a cargo plane may not lead to the same number of casualties as a passenger plane, it can have a broader impact on our open and free society, leading to more regulations, slower supply chain operations, and major economic damage. Air cargo is crucial to the global economic engine. 35% of the total world trade value is carried by air, 35%. And over the next 20 years, it's predicted that world air cargo traffic will grow 4.2% per year. Air cargo will remain a huge part of the modern globalized economy, which is why it is absolutely paramount that we do all we can to protect it. In order to continue our efforts to protect and secure air cargo, the government and industry must work together and maintain a constant dialogue. While cooperation is essential for all aviation security, it is especially important for cargo, where every security decision made has a direct impact on the economy. We need the manufacturers, shippers, freight forwarders, and everyone else involved in the supply chain to engage with Congress and Homeland Security to explain how security decisions are impacting their businesses and what else can be done to address potential vulnerabilities. I commend Homeland Security for working with industry and seeking input as it aims to stay one step ahead of the threats we face on a daily basis. While we in Congress often blame the bureaucracy of the executive agencies, Homeland Security has made a concerted effort to think creatively in the cargo security space. The Certified Cargo Screening Program and the use of canines and technologies for domestic screening, as well as the Air Cargo Advanced Screening Pilot Program and the National Cargo Security Program for international screening, are evidence of those innovative ways TSA is approaching air cargo security. However, there is always more that can be done and many questions that need to be answered. Is TSA adapting fast enough to the evolving security threats and economic issues involved in air cargo? Are there new technologies that could improve both security and supply chain speed? Why are third-party canine teams not authorized for screening cargo, especially where certain technologies are incapable? This is where Congress can assist. As you are all aware, this committee addressed many of these issues in our bipartisan Homeland Security Authorization bill that overwhelmingly passed the House last week. It's the first reauthorization of Homeland Security ever. The authorization bill mandates permanent implementation of the Air Cargo Advanced Screening Program, which will ensure that Customs and TSA have access to important security data and enhanced screening enhanceability, to protect against threats to air cargo. The bill also directs TSA to issue standards for certifying third-party canines for use in the air cargo sector. This will expand the number of canines available for cargo screening and enhance security in an operationally efficient manner. We appreciate the input from all of our witnesses today as we seek to improve the security of the Homeland, especially the air cargo sector. We believe these improvements in the Homeland Security Authorization Bill will have positive impacts on both the security and efficiency of the air cargo sector. But we know there are many more that can be addressed. We ask all of our witnesses today to continue to do what you've always done, and that is give us your honest feedback and perspective on the challenges we face with air cargo and what else can be done to improve both security and industry options. I think I speak for myself and Ms. Watson-Coleman and other members of this committee that we always welcome your input. We're here together to make this country a safer place and that make our transportation system safer. We must maintain an open dialogue and continue to support a strong collaboration between industry and government in order to successfully mitigate this very real threat. I thank all of you for being here today and for your continued support and engagement with this committee. Now, I am pleased to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from New Jersey, my friend Ms. Watson-Coleman, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Katko. Thank you for holding today's hearing, and I'd also like to thank our witnesses for joining us today and sharing their expertise. Today's topic, air cargo security, is not one that usually receives a lot of headlines and attention, yet it is critical to our economy. In fact, according to the International Air Transport Association, air cargo accounts for approximately 35% of the value of all products that are traded worldwide. An attack on our cargo industry could have devastating effects on commerce, and since many cargo shipments are made and are placed in the belly of passenger planes, such an attack could also result in significant loss of life. Unfortunately, the lack of headlines surrounding air cargo has not kept it hidden from our adversaries. As Chairman Katko has stated, in 2010, terrorists attempted to hide bombs inside printer cartridges that were shipped out of Yemen. Only a last-minute intelligence tip from a foreign partner prevented the explosives from flying on an aircraft bound for the U.S. While no similar attempts against cargo have been reported since 2010, terrorists continue to seek new ways to attack our transportation systems. Given the threat, TSA must consistently partner with industry stakeholders to enhance air cargo security. Next week will mark the 10th anniversary of one of the most significant Homeland Security laws ever enacted, the implementing recommendations of the 9/11 Commission Act of 2007. Our leader on this panel, Ranking Member Thompson, was the author of this measure that, among other things, required 100% screening of cargo on domestic and international inbound passenger flights within 3 years. Complying with this mandate was a massive undertaking for TSA and industry, and we should all be very proud that together they were able to achieve compliance for domestic passenger flights in 2010 and international inbound passenger flights in 2012. The 10-year anniversary of the passage of the Implementing 9/11 Commission Act is a great time to reflect on how far we've come and to be grateful that no attacks against our air cargo system have been carried out. However, we cannot rest on our laurels. We must constantly improve our security to keep up with the evolving threat. We must continue to prioritize the security of our transportation systems and invest in security measures that really make a difference, like those that help secure our cargo rather than wasting billions on a border wall that will not improve security. Additionally, we cannot allow the attention we rightfully pay to passenger security to come at the expense of focusing on air cargo security. And just as the threat landscape constantly evolves, so too does the nature of commerce. The emergence of e-commerce sites like Amazon and eBay has caused a seismic shift in not only Americans buy goods, but also their expectations about how quickly they will receive them. This, of course, has huge implications for the air cargo sector. I will be interested in hearing from our witnesses and how these changes are affecting air cargo security, as well as what changes industry, TSA, and Congress should consider to improve security. And I do believe it is important that we hear from all of our stakeholders. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to submit testimony for the record from the Airline Pilots Association.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Again, I thank the witnesses for being here, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Ms. Watson-Coleman. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel here to testify before us today on this very important topic. Let me remind the witnesses that their entire written statements will appear in the record, so there's no need to, if it's a very long statement, maybe you can abbreviate a little bit, but hopefully within 5 minutes to 10 minutes is fine. Our first witness is Mr. Steven Alterman. Mr. Alterman began his career in aviation in 1968 as a trial attorney in Bureau of Enforcement for the United States Civil Aeronautics Board and was subsequently promoted to chief of the legal division. Mr. Alterman joined the Cargo Airline Association in 1975 and currently serves as its president. In addition, Mr. Alterman is the chairman of the TSA Aviation Security Advisory Committee, a member of the FAA Management Advisory Council, and a member of the Department of Transportation National Freight Advisory Committee. The chair now recognizes Mr. Alterman for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, members of the subcommittee. I was going to introduce myself, but I don't think I have to. Thank you, Mr. Katko.
You're very well known by us anyway, so that's all right.
That's what I was afraid of, Mr. Katko. The all-cargo carriers and the customers and airports they serve are a unique portion of the aviation marketplace. Customers around the world depend on our services to transport high-value, time-sensitive products such as medical devices and related components of the medical supply chain, computers and other electronics, automobile parts. And in calendar 2016, the all-cargo segment of the industry operated 89% of the domestic revenue ton miles and 70.8% of the international RTMs. In operating these services, the safety and security of our cargo, our facilities, aircraft, employees, and the public are of utmost importance. It is simply bad policy and bad business not to take these issues seriously. In the area of security, we strongly believe that the best security is achieved when government and industry work together to identify vulnerabilities and to design and implement mitigation strategies. Over the past few years, TSA has moved in this direction, and we look forward to working with the agency as the outcome-based model of regulation matures. At this point, I want to thank this committee and the committee staff, who sometimes go unnoticed, for H.R. 2825. I actually wrote my testimony before the bill was enacted by the full House, and so I'm not going to go into much detail on some of the provisions there. However, I would like to thank them specifically on behalf of our members for several measures in the bill. We thank you for the third-party canine provisions of the bill, and we enthusiastically support the language of it. We also support a 5-year term for the administrator of the TSA. TSA. When Admiral Pekoski is sworn in as the next administrator of the TSA, it will be the 6th administrator or acting administrator that I've worked with as chair of ASAC in the past 3 years. That does not lead to much stability within the agency, and I really strongly thank you for putting a 5-year term in, and hope that the Senate does the exact same thing. In addition, and I know Mr. Mullen will talk about this in more detail, the provisions on the Air Cargo Advanced Screening Project were definitely appreciated. And my written testimony goes into some detail, but it basically mirrors the language of the provisions in H.R. 2825, so thank you very much. The third-party canine program is only one of many initiatives that have been studied by ASAC over the past several years. Another thanks and shout out to the committee is that ASAC is now a permanent committee. And you fixed the one glitch in the regulations by providing that the 2-year terms can be extended if no new committee is actually formed at the end of the 2-year terms. We really appreciate that. The other portion of the legislation that we really appreciate is the exemption from the Federal Advisory Committee Act. for the first time after that legislation, we were able to meet in secret, not trying to hide things from the public, but rather so we can discuss sensitive security issues without the public being there. That has played a very big part in our deliberations and enabled us to do some really interesting things. The ASAC membership is diverse, with representatives from virtually every segment of the aviation community, as well as users and victims groups. And the committee is supported by an array of subcommittees and ad hoc working groups. I just want to mention that our air cargo subcommittee of ASAC has been one of the most active subcommittees on the committee, and has put forth many initiatives in the air cargo sphere. In addition, again, as a result of legislation, ASAC's relatively new Security Technology Subcommittee has now been charged with exploring potential innovative technologies capable of performing improved screening of air cargo. They're just beginning on that project, but we're looking forward to their work. I think, again, going back to the 5-year term for the administrator, it simply does not lead to stability in the agency, and we really need that stability if we need to move forward on these issues. Thank you very much, and I would be obviously glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Alterman. And just to respond briefly, I totally agree with you. The yeoman's work that the staff on both sides did. The minority staff did a terrific job, and so did the majority staff. And together they came up with I think, a truly groundbreaking bill to reauthorize Homeland Security and its subsidiary agencies. And I think it's critically important to the function of all of these places, all of these agencies going forward, that they had this reauthorization. And I think that the 5-year term for the administrator was probably one of the best provisions because I thought of it. I'm just kidding. I did think of it, but it's an important provision. There's many others, and I think making ASAC a permanent part of our ongoing processes here is really important. As you know, under the last 3 years, ASAC has grown in prominence and importance, and we routinely rely on your input, and we hope you continue to provide us that good leadership from the ASAC because it's been very good. So thank you with that. Now, we appreciate your testimony, Mr. Alterman, and we would like to introduce our second witness, Mr. Brandon Freed. Mr. Freed has more than 38 years of experience in the air freight forwarding industry and was appointed as the Executive Director of the Air Forwarders Association in 2005. He also serves as a member of the TSA Aviation Security Advisory Committee, the U.S. Department of Commerce Committee on Supply Chain Competitiveness, and the Customs and Border Protection Commercial Operations Advisory Committee. I defy you to fit all that in one business card. I now recognize Mr. Freed for his opening statement.
Chairman Katko and Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to present the views of the Air Forwarders Association on air cargo security. The Air Forwarders Association represents 250 air freight forwarders and supporting companies employing tens of thousands of employees and dedicated contractors. Our members range from small businesses employing fewer than 20 people to large firms employing well over 1,000, and business models vary from domestic-only operations to worldwide operations. Additionally, a few of our members operate their own aircraft. In short, we are the travel agents for cargo. We move cargo throughout the United States and the world in the most time and cost-efficient manner, be it on aircraft, truck, rail, or ship. Security is at the forefront of our business. And we've worked closely with TSA since its inception, and we have committed several $1 million over the past 16 years to ensure that our role in the security supply chain is secure. For example, our members have invested millions of dollars in security screening equipment, secure systems and facilities, employee background checks, maintaining compliance with the known shipper management system and the indirect air carrier management system, along with annual security training to secure our portion of the global supply chain. In short, we play an integral role to ensure the safety and security of shipments traveling on both domestic and international airlines. And we take this role seriously. We know that terrorists remain interested in airplanes and therefore are looking for any possible vulnerabilities in the system. Throughout the past 16 years, we have rolled up our sleeves to meet the requirements of the Aviation Transportation Security Act, the 100% screening requirement for all shipments on passenger planes, and finally, the initiatives following the 2010 Yemen incident, as referred to earlier. We know what is at stake, and we will do our part. Now, so today I'd like to focus on 3 key points. First, the consistent interpretation of regulations being essential. Our members operate facilities throughout the United States, and therefore many inspectors inspect our facilities. Like any business investigated by the United States government, we rely on the consistent interpretation of regulations from facility to facility. We understand that people are people, and 100% consistency is not always attainable. That is why we urge the new prospective TSA administrator, when confirmed, to move the inspectors at TSA under the policy division within the agency. Interpretation of policy and implementation of policy should be joined at the hip. At the end of the day, security deteriorates when operators do not have a clear understanding of regulations due to inconsistent policy interpretations. So, standardized form of training is critical. Properly trained employees are the backbone of security, and our community has relied on the TSA to provide training materials to assist the indirect air carriers with the training requirements in the regulations. But recently, we have learned that the agency will no longer provide this training curriculum. The absence of this standardized educational tool will likely lead to stakeholder confusion and misinterpretation of vital security elements inherent in the program. The Known Shipper Program needs to be updated. Now, the Known Shipper Program traces its origin back to the Aviation Transportation Security Act, and in 2001, e-commerce was a nascent industry. Per the Census Department, e-commerce had almost $500 billion in U.S. retail sales over the past year. Now, we're not advocating for the elimination of the Known Shipper Program, but we firmly believe that the Known Shipper Program needs to be reframed to reflect today's e-commerce reality. So I'd like to also comment on just a couple of additional security items. The attempted printer cartridge bombings of all cargo flights from Yemen in 2010 taught us that while 100% physical screening of cargo is essential, such inspection does not mean that our skies are 100% secure. We are therefore supportive of the government's Air Cargo Advanced Screening, ACAS initiative, in which vital information from the bill of lading is analyzed for threat assessment. Now, a few of our members have been participating in the ongoing voluntary ACAS pilot program. And our only comment is that forwarders should not be the only ones required to submit data, and this task should be accessible through a readily available government portal. And finally, we have long been supportive of additional tools to the security toolbox. Private third-party provided canines for air cargo screening is a relatively inexpensive tool that we have long advocated for, and we are encouraged by the recent developments signaling that third-party canines for air cargo screening will finally become a reality. However, Congress must assure that TSA receives the necessary oversight funding to manage the program and hold the agency accountable for its implementation. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to share the Air Forwarders Association view today.
Thank you, Mr. Freed. We appreciate you being here as well and taking the time out of your busy schedule. Our third witness is Michael Mullen, Executive Director of the Express Association of America. Prior to joining EAA, Mr. Mullen was the Assistant Commissioner for International Affairs and Trade Relations at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, where he served from 2004 to 2009. Earlier, he was a Senior Associate at Booz Allen Hamilton and the Director of Nonprofit Organizations focusing on trade issues in the Asia-Pacific region. Mr. Mullen concluded a 20-year career as a Navy officer, for which we are grateful, with an assignment as the Assistant Naval Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. Sir, thank you for your service again, and I now recognize you for your opening statement.
Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and members of the subcommittee. I want to focus my testimony today on a critically important development in air cargo security in the past decade, the Air Cargo Advanced Screening, or ACAS, pilot program. ACAS was born out of the terrorist attack on air cargo supply chains in late 2010, as both the chairman and the ranking member mentioned. It was started by the 3 members of the Express Association of America, DHL, FedEx, and UPS. ACAS now has 20 members, including passenger airlines, heavy cargo airlines, and freight forwarders. These companies voluntarily provide a subset of manifest information to Customs and Border Protection and TSA as early as possible in the supply chain. CBP assesses this data to identify high-risk shipments for threats to aviation. 80% of the air cargo entering the United States today is covered by ACAS members. The government has analyzed ACAS data on over 440 million shipments in the last 6.5 years. Any shipments considered higher risk are subjected to screening in accordance with TSA regulations. To date, no threats to aviation have been detected. TSA, CBP, and DHS have been discussing a draft ACAS regulation over the past few years, but have yet to issue a proposed rule. The ACAS pilot was extended last week until July of 2018. We believe some important lessons have been learned from the pilot that we would like to see incorporated into the regulation, and several of these were addressed in the Homeland Security reauthorization, to which I also want to add my appreciation. That was an excellent piece of legislation from our viewpoint. So these lessons include, first, when industry and government truly work together as partners, the results are dramatic. ACAS has been called the best public-private partnership in history. Both sides worked together to develop a solution that was operationally feasible for industry while satisfying government's security requirements. The process has become known as co-creation. Second, the 7 ACAS data elements are sufficient for risk targeting. Government agencies should seek to minimize required data elements to those they truly need to perform their mission. Third, the data provided for ACAS is raw data, and we have learned that small errors do not substantially affect the value of the information for targeting purposes. Fourth, ACAS targeting and risk assessment are done from a centralized location. This approach is far better than allowing individual ports to conduct their own targeting, which can lead to a lack of consistency. Fifth, ACAS members can complete the necessary actions in response to a request for screening at an operationally optimum point in the supply chain. And that has great value in reducing the commercial impacts in terms of additional costs or delays. Sixth, because ACAS data is provided early in the supply chain and the government accepts that it is raw data, no penalties are applied in ACAS for data timeliness or accuracy. While industry accepts that an ACAS regulation may include penalties, they should only apply in cases of gross negligence or fraud. ACAS has proven government can place a high level of trust in its industry partners. Government should not now start handing out parking tickets for minor data discrepancies. Seventh, government intelligence regarding a specific shipment must be shared with the private sector so screeners know what they are looking for. Eighth, air cargo operators are highly motivated to ensure their systems are not targeted by a terrorist weapon and have made major investments in creating a secure aviation network which is based on multiple layers of government regulations and their own corporate security measures. ACAS is just one more layer in that process. And finally, international harmonization is critical for ensuring effective aviation security. The U.S. government should seek alignment with international organizations and other countries to develop common standards and procedures for providing advanced shipment data, so that the private sector is not presented with dozens of different requirements. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. There are several things I will be following up with you on during my questioning, and we appreciate you for being here as well. I always admire anyone who's served in the military, and I just swore my son in as a second lieutenant, so he's embarking on his career now, and he'll be going to Fort Benning, Georgia next month to start the infantry officer training stuff. He could have been a pilot, but he decided he wanted to do infantry instead, so there goes listening to the old man, I guess, right? So our fourth witness is Mr. Bart Elias, specialist in aviation policy at the Congressional Research Service. Mr. Elias received his PhD from Georgia Tech in 1994 and spent the next 5 years at the Air Force Research Laboratory. In 1999, he became an aviation human performance investigator at the National Transportation Safety Board, where he worked on several major accident investigations, including the crash of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s private plane. In addition to his work with CRS, Mr. Elias has also served on the Transportation Research Board's Committee on Aviation Security and Emergency Management, chairing its subcommittee on aviation safety. I now recognize Mr. Elias for his opening statement.
Chairman Katko, Ranking Member Thompson, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on the topic of air cargo security. The air cargo industry serves business and consumer demand for the transport of high-value and time-critical goods. Forecasts project continued growth in air cargo over the next 2 decades, spurred by expanding global economy and the growth of e-commerce. My remarks today will focus on 4 key aspects of air cargo security: insider threats, risk-based targeting of shipments, physical screening, and in-flight protection from explosives. Insiders, individuals with access to and detailed knowledge of the air cargo system, pose a vexing threat. Adding to the challenge is the fact that the air cargo system and air cargo is often stored and prepared for shipment at off-airport facilities and arrives at airports in bulk. Complex supply chains involve large numbers of individuals who handle and transport cargo, as well as individuals responsible for routing and tracking shipments. Historically, these supply chains have been infiltrated by organized crime, and there is some concern that terrorist networks could likewise infiltrate airports, distribution centers, and ground transportation operations. Efforts to address insider threats have focused on worker vetting. Recent statutory changes allow for more detailed records checks of certain cargo workers, but systematic reviews of the process and available options to improve vetting techniques may be beneficial. Vetting of shippers and shipments is another key element of the multi-layered approach to air cargo security. The known shipper program serves as the primary means for vetting shipments. Only consignments received from known shippers can fly aboard passenger airplanes. In addition, Customs and Border Protection utilizes its automated targeting system to evaluate inbound international cargo. Building on this, CBP and TSA continues to pilot test the Air Cargo Advanced Screening, or ACAS system. Under this system, freight forwarders and airlines voluntarily submit key data elements of cargo manifests for pre-departure vetting. While the ultimate objective is to develop uniform regulations for advanced cargo screening, progress has been relatively slow despite favorable views of the concept and active industry participation. Last year, the Aviation Security Advisory Committee expressed concern that after more than 5 years of testing, the system had still not been fully developed, and in its view, TSA had not devoted adequate staffing and resources to the project. In 2007, the 9/11 Act mandated 100% screening of air cargo placed on passenger flights. Mandatory screening is primarily accomplished under the voluntary Certified Cargo Screening Program. This program has been widely viewed by industry as a successful example of a voluntary initiative that addresses statutory requirements while providing flexibility to address industry-specific challenges. However, projected future growth in air cargo may pose a challenge, especially if facilities do not appropriately plan for it. If cargo shipments spike, some facilities may have difficulty acquiring additional screening equipment promptly. Industry growth could create opportunities to upgrade screening technologies and streamline processes, but it also introduces investment risks if cargo activity later falls off. Another option under consideration is the possible use of TSA-approved third-party explosives detection K-9 teams to screen air cargo. While many in industry support the idea, TSA put the concept on hold after a 2011 pilot project failed to demonstrate reliable results. TSA is currently reevaluating available options, and it is premature to say whether private K-9 teams could help address air cargo screening needs effectively. Finally, the 9/11 Commission recommended the deployment of at least one hardened cargo container on every passenger aircraft. This concept was widely regarded as being too costly and too complex to implement, but new technologies may make it practical. For example, lightweight bomb-resistant bags have been successfully tested in the United Kingdom. This may address the weight concerns associated with designs tested and certified in the United States over a decade ago. In summary, while a comprehensive framework for air cargo security exists in the United States, several elements of this framework, including the Air Cargo Advanced Screening System, remain incomplete. This concludes my prepared statement, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Elias. I appreciate your testimony, and I'm particularly interested in following up with you either during the hearing today or at some point afterwards about the problem I see with new technologies from the time the idea is born until the time they get them on the front lines to help out. I think the stovepipe mentality and the bottle gap that's within Homeland Security is a real problem, and perhaps you could shed some light on that for us if we have time today. But I appreciate your testimony, and I want to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Thompson, who is here with us today. In a moment, he'll be asking questions as well. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Muller, I think I'll begin with you. You mentioned something that I'm always interested in, and that's public-private partnerships. I think that increases dramatically the efficiencies of government by basically providing you the tools and getting the heck out of the way and just providing appropriate oversight. And I want to talk about the Air Cargo Advanced Screening pilot program. And I stress the word pilot because it's been a pilot program for way too long. And I'd like to hear your opinions on, by taking away that and just making it part of our overall apparatus that we requested in the authorization bill that came out of the House, what that will do to benefit, if anything, with the program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, ACAS was unique in the way it was created because what the Yemen bomb plot indicated was that our existing regulation, which was the Trade Act of 2002 that required manifest information to be submitted 4 hours before the arrival of the aircraft, was not adequate. That would have been way too late if those bombs hadn't been discovered the way they were when they were still over in Europe and the Middle East. So essentially, CBP and TSA presented that problem to industry and said, we need this information earlier, or we need a subset of the data on each shipment earlier than we're getting it now. But they allowed industry to devise the most effective approach to providing that information earlier. And the thing was, the flexibility the government adopted was also very important. Many different members have joined ACAS, and the government has been able to adopt a flexible IT approach with each company where they can adapt their ability to receive the data to the capability of the government, of the industry to submit it. So I think the measures that are outlined in the Homeland Security reauthorization are enormously important. But what's going to be required to make it work is that willingness to treat each other as co-equals, as trusted partners going forward, and government's ability to adapt, which is essentially an industry solution to a security problem.
Thank you, Mr. Muller, and I couldn't agree more, and I trust that going forward, if we're successful in getting this authorization passed out of the Senate and signed into law, that and this becomes a permanent entity, that you will continue to interact with us to keep us abreast of issues that we need to address, if any, going forward. Mr. Freed, I appreciate your testimony as well, and just talk about the National Cargo Security Program in general, but in particular, the Known Shipper Program and the Indirect Air Carrier Program. Are there any improvements that can be made to those programs that we should be aware of or that we need to address, which we haven't?
Excuse me, as I stated in my testimony, I believe that the Known Shipper Program has to be streamlined to reflect today's economic and electronic realities. And e-commerce didn't exist a number of years ago. So we want to be able to get as many shippers as possible onto these planes. Because you got to remember that all cargo is now screened on the piece level, physically screened. But at the same time, if the known shipper management system can quickly accommodate these transactions, that's where we have some issues. So we need to get a group together, maybe a joint task force from TSA and stakeholders, in coming up with ways to streamline the management system so that we can get more of these shippers on planes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Elias, briefly, long as we'll have a minute left, we do have a little time. I've been vitally concerned since I've been in Congress about the stopgap, if you will, the bottleneck, I should say, of getting technology from idea to implementation has just been a mess at Homeland Security. And I see so many vendors out there and so many people with great ideas. And either it's the RFP process, which is like Lucy holding the football and pulling away from Charlie Brown to the last second. They keep changing RFPs down the road, and they're not, the willingness not to think outside the box as much as they should. So could you comment on some of that and what you think we could do moving forward to help expedite that process in the cargo security arena?
In terms of expediting the process, that may be difficult in the context of federal acquisition law. But I will comment in general on the air cargo industry in that the CCSP in particular is a system where there is a list that TSA provides of approved screening equipment that the industry then purchases for screening the cargo. That may offer an opportunity for some flexibilities in terms of the ability to for TSA to more quickly identify approved screening equipment as opposed to going through the full federal acquisition process.
Thank you, Mr. Elias. And my time is up, but I'll just know, Mr. Alterman, I haven't forgot about you. My time is up, but I do want to thank you again for all you've contributed over the years to the industry, and I hope you remain a robust member of the ASAC for a long time, because your input's been very valuable, and the input I've received back from the ASAC committee as a whole, since I've been chairman of this subcommittee, has been extraordinarily helpful. So bottom line, just keep it up, okay?
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee as a whole, Mr. Thompson, for his questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to submit my written testimony for the record.
Without objections, so ordered.
You know, I think this is a watershed moment for air cargo screening in this country. When we first talked about it, people said it can't be done. And, you know, I refused to believe it then, and I think now we've done a very good job at not only keeping security uppermost, but we've also been able to keep commerce moving in the process. So I think Congress was right to mandate the 100%. It just took us a little while to get there, but nonetheless, we're there. So I guess the question that I'd have, and I'll start with Mr. Elias, is what transformation have you seen from the beginning to now that is, you think, important for this committee to understand, and what's the takeaway going forward for us to continue this effort?
Well, I think some of the transformation that you describe really does reflect your view of the notion that it was impossible or improbable to accomplish 100% screening before it was enacted. I know, talking to folks in industry, that there was real concern that how were we going to accomplish this? And there was a transformation to a view where now we've been faced with this mandate. What do we need to do to work together to meet the requirements and at the same time meet the industry-specific needs to keep cargo moving through the system? And, you know, that was a process that took a few years. You know, domestically, it probably took on the order of 3 years to accomplish, and closer to 5 years to work with our international partners to accomplish that. But, you know, moving forward, as you said, it's been a bit of a transformation in terms of the view of how the screening could work effectively in the comprehensive, multi-layered approach to air cargo security.
Thank you. And I guess the other members of the panel, you have kind of seen the metamorphosis of where we are now. Can you give us, Mr. Alderman, and going forward, your opinion?
Yeah, I thank you very much for the question. One of the things that I've noticed, and I agree with Mr. Elias, but one of the things that Yemen taught us was that the key element in air cargo security, indeed on all security, is good intelligence. That plot would not have been resolved without the Saudis giving us good intelligence. One of the things that's happened over the last few years is that the ability to share intelligence information both among the government agencies and between the government agencies and the industry has become crucially important, perhaps more important than anything else that we can do from a regulatory standpoint. And so what we discovered as a result of Yemen and the years following is there are a whole number of organizations in the United States government with intelligence oversight. They don't always talk to each other. And to be perfectly honest, TSA cannot tell us what they don't know. So we have to make sure that the intra-government relationships on intelligence sharing get to the people who can share it with the industry. The second part of that is that TSA must be able and willing to share that information with key people and the members of their stakeholder community. Because it doesn't do any good for TSA to have that intelligence information if it's not transmitted to the people who can actually act on that in the industry. And again, that goes back to some of the first things that Chairman Katko said, and that's that security works best when industry and government work together to identify the issues and then design the mitigation strategies for that. It's crucially important in the intelligence area. We need the government to get the information to the TSA, and TSA must not only say, here's the information, they must work with the stakeholders to say, what is the result of this information and how can we mitigate it? Don't just put on, here's the information and here's what you shall do. Again, it goes back to the cooperative agreement. But I think what I've discovered in going back to your question was the advancement of intelligence information and the recognition that intelligence is so crucial has become really needs to come to the forefront.
Thank you. My time is up. At some point, I'd love to hear the response from the other two panelists.
We have some leeway, Mr. Thompson, so please go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Freed, you'd like to take a chance?
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. You know, the Certified Cargo Screening Program is a shining example of success born out of both government and private partnerships working together, because we knew that failure was not an option. So we had to make this 100% screening mandate work. And for the past 7 years or so, we've been screening using this risk-based, multi-layered approach, and it's worked. So we have physical screening, and it's throughout the United States on, as you said, flights leaving and coming and everywhere. But I think within TSA, I agree with what Mr. Alterman just said about the need for information sharing. But I also think it's incumbent upon TSA to provide swifter policy interpretation within our industry so that we are not left guessing on the stakeholder side as to how to interpret policies that are coming out of the agency. And that's particularly concerning to us because obviously safety is at stake.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen?
Congressman, I would just note that the results of the Yemen incident really serve to highlight the enormously robust security programs that members of the air cargo industry had in place for decades. And it ranges from employee vetting and training through screening of shipments from high-risk countries to a whole range of measures that the companies use to protect their own assets and their brand. And the measures like ACAS add an additional layer to those, but it's been effective because there was already a very solid foundation. 100% screening was feasible because a lot of these companies were already screening all the shipments coming from certain high-threat countries. So that's the key going forward, is that government and industry continue to work together that way, but recognizing the very good foundation that we have in place already.
Thank you. I appreciate the Chair's indulgence. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Thompson. The Chair right now welcomes to the committee the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Estes, and recognizes him for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The previous question asked by Mr. Thompson kind of centered around one of the questions that I wanted to start with is, what are additional resources that TSA maybe particularly needs. And so I don't know if there's other things, tools or techniques out there. Can you embellish upon that? And maybe just open that up for all of you to start with, Mr. Alterman.
Yes, and I'm not sure additional resources, although they always help, they always help. You know, probably the personnel policies and organization of TSA is probably none of my business, but it does relate to the question you asked, and that's that once upon a time at TSA, we had an air cargo division that concentrated on air cargo and had scores of people working in it. That has shifted away, so we don't have that organization anymore. And more than additional resources, I think there should be concentration of recognizing the unique place that air cargo plays in the world. And one of the ACAS recommendations a while back was to reconstitute the air cargo office within the Office of Security Policy and Industry Engagement. I'm not sure it needs 40 people, but I sure as heck think that what we really need within TSA is a shifting of priorities, and Brandon hit on this, you know, on a more specific basis. But I really think that we need an Office of Air Cargo Policy that brings together all the disparate people within TSA that work on air cargo, so we don't wind up with different policies and different interpretations of the same policy. That reorganization type of operation would do a tremendous amount to increase the air cargo security.
Mr. Estes, I would agree with what Mr. Alderman just said, and I would also tell you that, you know, air cargo is seemingly a simple business, but it is fraught with complexity. You do need people who are focused and dedicated to the workings of air cargo. And to just mix them in with this general aviation umbrella, I think does air cargo a disservice, and I think it does air cargo security a disservice as well.
Congressman, I would just add that I think there's some novel approaches to focusing the existing government resources a little bit better than we're doing right now. CBP has a personnel shortfall right now, but they've developed a program where the private sector can come to them and propose projects where the private sector provides some resources. It might be office space, it might be overtime salaries. There's a range of things that the private sector can provide, and CBP will work with them to provide their officers to focus inspection activities in a certain area at a certain time, perhaps weekends or off hours. So I think it's programs like that where government can work with industry to focus the existing resources a little bit more effectively.
Mr. Lass, did you have any thoughts as well along the same lines?
Just some brief thoughts, really to build on that, just to leverage some of the capabilities of industry to work with TSA. As I mentioned before in response to Chairman Katko's comment, within the CCSP, there may be some opportunities to look at things like novel approaches to screening technology, those types of things, through partnership with industry.
Thank you. My next question, maybe it's one that's already well understood by the other committee members, but coming from a new member, we talked a little bit about the third-party K-9 program and how that's being added in, and I guess I'll ask you, Mr. Alterman, since you brought it up first, is what were some of the specific things that we were wanting to see accomplished with that wasn't being done now internally?
Well, historically in TSA, there's been a pushback against allowing third-party canines to screen cargo. TSA has a cadre of wonderful dogs, but there aren't enough of them, and they're TSA dogs. And there's always been a pushback from the agency about doing a third-party canine program. The legislation, they have moved somewhat in the direction of allowing this, but your legislation, I think, pushed it over the edge. And what they are doing now, at least on our last meeting with them, is exactly what the language of the 2825 says. And, you know, the devil is always in the details. We don't know exactly what the program is going to look like when it comes out of the other end of the sausage grinder, but we have been told that it will conform to the language of the Act. We are a little concerned that things never move fast enough within government agencies, and TSA in particular, and we're a little concerned that the details may be concerning. We had a meeting with them, and they promised to show us where they were going before they actually started implementing it. We haven't heard back from them, but the good news was that I did speak to someone who said they're going to try to have a program in place by October 1st of this year, which is very aggressive and very good if they actually do it. The industry continues to be in a show-me state because of the traditional reluctance to do this. But with the help of the legislation, and hopefully when the Senate gets around to doing the same thing, we think that we're on the right path there, and I think that we're overcoming the reluctance.
Thank you. It's interesting you mentioned the sausage-making process. I was informed on the floor today that using that terminology to talk about our legislative process denigrates sausages. So, anyway, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you each for your information. It is very helpful to me. I have so many questions regarding this issue. I want to start with this, and this is for all three of you, actually. I'd like to hear from the three members of the private sector witnesses about the security of our cargo screening system, because it appears to me that the approach TSA takes in addressing cargo security relies a lot on effective communication and coordination among industry and TSA and a limited degree of oversight. So one could argue that given the nature of the threat, there should be more agency oversight and compliance inspections of cargo security screening. I would appreciate if the three of you could briefly tell me now or for the record why the system we have in place is effective at preventing successful attacks via cargo, and what, if any, more should we be doing? And I also want you to know that I'm very impressed and very concerned about the disbursement of the sort of functions throughout TSA of something that seems to belong in one sort of centralized location, and would love for someone to tell me when and why that happened, if you could. Thank you.
Ms. Watson-Coleman, I can probably address the oversight issue at the TSA. I would tell you that, TSA has 500 cargo inspectors out in the field overseeing approximately 4,000 indirect air carriers, the freight forwarders. So most of, or all of our members and freight forwarders throughout the United States see the TSA personnel on a very frequent basis, both through the front door and through the back door, testing our facilities, making sure they're hardened, making sure that our securities are in fact secure. So there is a tremendous amount of oversight, especially in the certified cargo screening program. They're constantly coming in, looking at our videotapes, looking at the screening process itself. It could range from several times a week to a few times a month. It depends on how they see fit. And
some are they not looking at smaller facilities, or how are they deciding where to concentrate their effort if they've only got 500?
Well, I didn't mean to imply that there are those indirect air carriers that are not supervised or not overseen or checked. They are checked on I assume, a random basis. I don't know exactly what the algorithm is within TSA's inspection force, but I can tell you they are frequent visitors to our facilities. So, the oversight, I think, is there. But what we really need to be doing is focusing on ways to increase the amount of technology that's out there, improve. And as an example, right now, I don't know whether you knew this or not, but there's no technology in existence that TSA is validated and certified that will screen many types of commodities on a pallet. And so that's one of the reasons why we have to move forward very quickly to make sure that these canines are in fact provided on a third-party basis to the stakeholders, to the forwarders, so that we can begin this screening in that fashion. And we assume that there'll be very aggressive TSA oversight.
But what do you think is the biggest problem with getting these canines that can be trained? I mean, I read the sort of information, a briefing on it, and it seemed like TSA just didn't find canines that met the grade. Why is that?
Well, I can't speak to whatever happened prior to this in the pilot program for a number of years ago, but I can tell you that there is a robust industry of canine providers out there that are ready to train to TSA standards. And they are there is a pretty large number of dogs ready to go throughout wherever needed. So, once again, the private sector can come in and assist the TSA. Now, what's causing delay? I think that, this is something that the TSA is reluctant to release out of its control because obviously they've had such strict oversight over these canines for a number of years. But I think that over time, their confidence will build that, in fact, the private sector can rise to the occasion. And by the way, even exceed the standards.
Let me ask you one quick question, and I know the other two gentlemen didn't get a chance to respond to my question. Who mentioned the bomb bags?
You mean the containers?
That was me.
Well, the word was bag, so I just wanted to know what was that, how does that work, and what is the problem with having that used here if it's been determined to be effective?
So that's ongoing research in the United Kingdom on bomb bags. They're about an inch thick, soft-sided bags that can contain an explosion on board an aircraft, and they've done demonstrations that has been effective on old aircraft parked in the UK. So in my testimony, I mentioned that the last time the United States has looked at the hardened cargo container technology was essentially a decade ago, building off of FAA research, and the TSA followed up with that based on legislative mandate in 2004. This UK technology seems promising, so it may be something worthy of re-examining.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a lot of questions that I had to do with the sort of chain of custody of things that ultimately get on airplanes, and I would just love to hear, and perhaps you could send that to us, what your ideas are to ensure that that sort of chain of custody is secure, and that we can be confident that this is working the way it's supposed to be. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
No, I think that's a particularly good point, given the perceived technological advances by the bad guys, right? So it is something we should definitely be noteworthy of, and I look forward to hearing your responses on that as well, and you can have 10 legislative days in which to send that back, and appreciate it. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mullen, is cargo ever transferred from a dedicated cargo flight onto a commercial passenger flight in order to arrive at perhaps a smaller airport with no dedicated cargo terminal?
Yes, sir, that happens routinely.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, on December 21st, 1988, and I thank the ranking member earlier for speaking on the amount of time we've been talking about this. On December 21st, 1988, Pan Am Flight 103 was blown from the sky over Lockerbie, Scotland, by the placement of a Semtex bomb in luggage transferred from, the flight went from Helsinki through Frankfurt to London and was en route to New York. 270 people died, 259 crew and passengers, and 11 on the ground where the wreckage fell. 2 weeks prior to that attack, the FAA received a detailed warning. This is what the investigation disclosed, what I'm sharing today. A detailed warning describing the attack precisely as it took place. It was taken very seriously by the FAA, and all the airlines were warned. Pan Am itself began collecting a $5 security surcharge, promising, and I quote, "a program that will screen passengers, employees, airport facilities, baggage, and aircraft with unrelenting thoroughness." This was almost 30 years ago, and yet we still discuss it today. So I would ask my question to you, Mr. Elias, given your background and your area of specialty, sir, considering the modern capability to digitally construct and shape Semtex plastic explosives, it seems to me that the detection of the chemical compound itself for plastic explosives has to be our goal. What can the Department of Homeland Security do to enhance the industry's ability to detect plastic explosives? And as a 14-year cop, I'm a great believer in canines. I think you're right, sir. Mr. Freed, you mentioned that there's a robust industry of canine providers. These dogs can be trained. They can be deployed rather inexpensively compared to some of the technologies out there. But Mr. Elias, I defer to your greater wisdom here, sir, and I ask you your response.
So your question really gets at the use of technology and what technologies are adopted, as well as alternatives to technology such as canine teams and how they could work in concert with each other.
To detect plastic explosive, yes, sir.
To detect explosives, yeah, absolutely, plastic and other explosives. So explosive trace detection technologies certainly have the capability to look at those chemical signatures of various different explosives. Canines certainly can be trained to do similar tasks. So the use of both of those technologies can augment other methods, such as explosives detection systems, which work on matter density and so forth, to look at explosives without looking at the chemical aspects of those explosives. So there's a host of technologies available. We really haven't gotten to the point to really field any other technologies other than those trace technologies, although there are some technologies that have been in the laboratory for years. They just haven't been seen as feasible to really move out into the field. So the canine teams certainly are seen as one potential option for looking at ways to detect chemical traces in the explosives.
Thank you for that answer. Mr. Freed?
Mr. Higgins, I'm a graduate of Syracuse University, and several students were on Pan Am 103 returning from their semester abroad in Europe,
I'm sorry for that pain, sir.
as were we in the Syracuse community. And I would tell you that there's not a day that goes by that we don't think of Pan Am 103. I would also say that this is a risk-based, multi-layered approach to security. There's not one magic bullet to actually detect every single threat. That's why everything's got to be working in concert, all these tools. I think that canines are a very viable tool that needs to be implemented as soon as possible. But technology is constantly evolving, and that's one of the reasons why TSA has got to use an aggressive approach to making sure they're considering every new piece of technology possible and making those new technologies available in the field so that they can work in concert with these canines when necessary.
Mr. Freed, that was a thoughtful and comprehensive answer. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fried, must note that I'm very happy to hear that you're from Syracuse University, as am I. So great minds
you.
think alike, I guess, right?
Jim Boeheim was hired my freshman year.
Oh, is that right?
Actually, my
You
sophomore
are
year.
dating yourself. I hope
I am dating myself.
And I hope you didn't dress as poorly as he has over the years. You've gotten better lately. But I'd like to thank all of you for your testimony today. It's been very helpful. It's been a long past due for this subcommittee to pay attention to air cargo from a committee standpoint. We pay attention to it every day, but talking about it in this setting is very, very important. And I appreciate all your testimony. It's a very impressive panel. I want to echo what I said earlier, and that is this is not a one-time deal. We routinely rely on you all feeding information to our committee staffs and for us to shape policy and shape laws and accordingly. So please keep up the interaction between all of us. I applaud you on the public-private partnerships. I applaud you on doing a terrific job in carrying out Ranking Member Thompson's mandate from years ago. I mean, I think it was his legislation that started this, and good for him. And I wish he was here for me to throw a compliment at him, because I don't do it very often. All right, it's on the record, so you can should make a record of it. But I do thank you for it, and I do thank Ms. Watson-Coleman, as always, and all the other members of the committee and the staff who did a great job on this. Let's keep moving on this, and if there's legislation that you need for us to take a look at, of course, it's our job to do that, and please keep it coming. And the last thing I can say is, go Orange. Thank you very much.
Orange.
So members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to those in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.
Legislative